I am delighted to be today with Zoie Phillips, a brand new AFMC-certified practitioner. Zoie also has some really lovely, juicy practitioner pearls overall to share with each of you, some things that she in particular has learned in the adventure, I think it is, of learning to practically apply functional medicine to everyday clinical practice.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here today. I'm so excited. So I'm a physician assistant, and right out of PA school, I started working for an integrative practice. And yesterday was actually my last day at that practice, and I'm now starting my own functional medicine practice.
I always like to ask practitioners right up front, while we'll dive into some of the nitty-gritty about your case. I would love to hear in your own words, how do you feel in aggregate about what you were able to achieve working with this patient?
Well, I feel honored to have partnered with this particular patient who was suffering from multiple autoimmune conditions and many symptoms that were really debilitating and negatively impacted his everyday life. Kept him from doing the things he loved, kept him from being active, kept him from pursuing work or school. So it was certainly an honor to partner with him and to be able to work through some of these root causes.
This is a young man in his early 20s, right? With multi-autoimmune diagnoses?
Absolutely, yes. Ulcerative colitis and also psoriasis.
Yeah, complex. Multifactorial for sure.
Absolutely.
And I know obviously through your certification process, you spent a lot of time really honing in on some of the key disease dynamics that you found in his unique case. And you identified a whole bunch of them very well, but I'd love for you to share just 2 or 3 of them that you think were particularly of note in his case.
Absolutely, right. Well, for this particular patient, he's been through a lot in his life, and trauma was certainly a factor. So one particular disease dynamic that I think really came to the surface for this patient was trauma. And we know how easily this fits into the autoimmune picture when we think about those driving forces for autoimmunity. We think about genetic predisposition, we think about triggers, and we also think about enhanced intestinal permeability. So for this particular patient, all 3 of those factors were at play, and unfortunately, trauma was one of them. So what I know to be true is that trauma primes the amygdala in our brain to be in that state of hypervigilance, and that really leads to that sympathetic state. Take a history of trauma that contributes to that sustained high levels of stress that promotes that sympathetic overdrive and shows up as that high cortisol and can lead to poor cortisol awakening response, which can present as, that energy crash in the middle of the day, feeling awake at night, and also feeling pretty anxious. So unfortunately, trauma was one factor for this patient, and we can see how it reared its ugly head in its everyday life.
Yeah, it's from a mechanism viewpoint, there's so much research that has been published in the past 5 or 6 years alone, as we learn more about this chronic stress, especially traumatic stress, and how that can prime the sympathetic nervous system and amygdala response, as you well said, and also how the flood of cortisol can over time reduce tissue sensitivity to cortisol, right? So we lose that sort of protection from stress. The vagal activity, the activity of the vagus nerve becomes impaired, and so we end up downstream affecting the microbiome, affecting barrier function in the intestines. And as we know, that's the gateway to so much autoimmunity. Well said. I love that you put that first. So often we overlook the life experience and dive right into the disease dynamics we can see, right?
Right.
That's an excellent one.
Thank you. I'd be happy to share another, if that sounds
please.
good.
Please do.
This was someone who was eating a standard American diet, as most of our patients may be doing the same, which we know is heavy in sugar and gluten and dairy and pretty devoid in key nutrients. And we know that this can lead to very easily suboptimal levels of folate, which is so crucial for methylation. And this is someone who was struggling with pretty significant anxiety and depression. So we know that suboptimal methylation does decrease the production of the neurotransmitters dopamine and serotonin, those feel-good hormones, and slows down the metabolization of stress hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine. So it makes sense why for him, anxiety and depression was also predominant.
Excellent. That right there is a wonderful chain of interconnectedness, right? In terms of what affects so many young people in our practices is they're eating crap food.
Yes.
It's lots of calories, lots of chemicals, especially young people. And the interconnectedness on the biochemistry that affects. I love that you highlighted that specifically in terms of how it affects his moods, which exacerbates everything. That's a great one. I know that your plan with this young man was multifactorial, but what are a couple of pearls from a practitioner viewpoint that maybe you want to share with your colleagues?
Sure. Well, I'd love to talk about stomach acid, and I know you do too. When we don't have these awesome digestive juices, our patients can experience gas and belching and bloating and decreased nutrient availability that can result in widespread nutrient depletions, which we know shows up as a multitude of symptoms. And we know how this makes perfect sense for someone who's living in that sympathetic overdrive. We don't prioritize the creation of hydrochloric acid if we're running from a bear. We're not going to stop and have a picnic. It just doesn't make sense.
What a great, simple analogy, right? That's classic SAFM fodder right there, right?
I love it.
Teaching your patient about it so that they can really understand.
Yes.
And that's another example of where not only vagal transmission, but also adrenal balance plays such a huge role on whether digestive secretions are paltry and inadequate or rich and abundant. Did you continue to work with this young man, and what has he achieved in terms of resolution and more resilient health?
Absolutely. So I have previously seen him as it was actually last week that I was able to check in with him, which was wonderful. And for the majority of his symptoms, they are mostly resolved, which I really think is quite incredible and speaks to the resiliency of the human body. I think this is really important to touch on, because for a lot of autoimmune patients, what they're told is that this is a lifelong battle and it doesn't have to be that way. And so for this particular patient who is dealing with bloating and gas, blood and mucus in his stool every single day, he no longer experiences those things. His absorption's better. He gained weight, healthy weight, which was so exciting for him. He no longer has tinnitus. He no longer struggles with anxiety and depression in the same way. And he's also now more active. He's able to go on hikes, which he used to love and used to enjoy, and is able to really integrate into society and pursue the things that he enjoys. So I think that's what's most fulfilling in working with any patient, is just seeing them achieve and do the things that set their soul on fire. Because for many patients, what brings them to us is the fact that they can no longer do the things that they love. So seeing them be able to feel better and get to that point where they can feel like themselves, that's really rewarding. One major takeaway from working with this patient is the power of listening and validating our patients. And I think sometimes it can be very easy to think poorly of ourselves, that we don't have enough knowledge and enough tools to be able to help patients. But I've really learned the power of just listening and validating patients in their experience, what they're experiencing in their body. It's real for them. It's true. And I think a lot of patients, especially autoimmune patients, are dismissed. Their symptoms are not validated, and they often are not believed. And it can really take a toll on them and make them feel hopeless. And we know how critical hope is for healing. It's imperative. And that's something that I always encourage patients with, and I let them know, is that you have every tool possible to heal, as long as you have the hope and the expectation that you can and will feel better. There's nothing standing in your way. So that's one big takeaway, is just to listen to your patients and to validate them and what their current experience is. And that's enough. Add on some awesome skills from SAFM, and that's all you need.
Oh, well said. My goodness. I hope that everyone who is watching this is inspired by your words about the importance of belief, the importance of people finally having good, resilient, not just hope, but belief in the power of their body, the power of them in guiding their lives and creating a different future.
Yes.
That's awesome.